The second shock. As discussed previously, mechanical man is given and made to receive the first shock at point 3. This enables us to live a physical existence. However, we do not give ourselves the shock at point 6 or the shock at point 9. When we begin to study the nature of the shock at point 6, then try to give ourselves that shock, we take a small step in the direction of consciousness and inner evolution. One reason why things go as they do in the world is that people are not properly conscious but assume quite erroneously that they are. From one side, the objective of this work is to expand our consciousness. But first we must become more conscious of ourselves. Paradoxically, we have to become conscious of the fact that we are not conscious. Through direct self-study, we have to realize that we pass most of our existence in a state of sleep. Nonetheless, in this state the shock at point 3 is given and received regularly. If our breathing, for example, depended upon our conscious attention, then we would not remain alive for very long. From one perspective then, the study of the shock at point 6 is the study of how to increase our consciousness, where it is referred to by the general term, self-remembering. However, the whole application of this work comes in at that point too. The work must be elevated to the place of incoming impressions, which cannot be done unless we are in an unusual state of consciousness. One that is different from our ordinary state. Between the second state of consciousness and the third there are varying degrees. So consider then the diagram of the 4 states of consciousness. We can mark degrees between the so-called waking state and the state of self-remembering. Suppose that we have an aim such as not to be negative with a certain person. We would have to remain awake to that aim, and to the inner state of ourselves at every moment, which will be a form of self-remembering. When we are remembering ourselves, we should also remember our aims. The trouble is that we find it difficult to live for long in this state of increased consciousness, because we exhaust the available energy that it requires, which is stored up in our accumulators. Consciousness, like everything else, is weighed and measured. There is only so much consciousness available to us. After a time we increase consciousness gradually, and then instead of falling very deeply asleep after a period of trying to be more conscious, as so often happens, we instead retain a certain awareness or memory of ourselves, some continuity of our inner life. However, the desire for sleep is tremendous, so that any attempt to give ourselves the shock at point 6 often exhausts or overwhelms us temporarily, making us feel drained. We feel we have had or done enough. Sleep, of course, is easy, because this work is not necessary for the conduct of everyday life. If we knew, for example, that when we stop remembering ourselves for a minute we'd die, then it would indeed be very difficult to fall asleep. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending upon how we look at it, we can begin to identify from the moment that we get up in the morning, even through inner talking and that little voice in our head that constantly banters with us, then remain fast asleep all day from that moment on. When we catch ourselves asleep in this way, and realize that we have been completely identified with inner talking, making accounts against others and justifying everything to ourselves, then we are in a position to understand what giving ourselves that shock at point 6 consists of, and so how to snap out of our daydream. We will be able to know the difference between being in a mechanical state of sleep and being more conscious of ourselves, living more in each moment. Self-remembering cannot be explained in so many words, because it is an experience of greater or lesser intensity. We all know how difficult it is to explain an experience to someone else. However, there is one fundamental description of what the shock of self-remembering is like, to which we could compare with the shock of breathing. The shock of breathing consists of a movement out and a movement in, an indrawing and an outgoing. Similarly, there is too what could be referred to as inspiration and expiration, and as with a complete act of breathing, the cycle of impressions includes both. However, there is no contradiction in the opposite movements, because they form together as a complete cycle. We make about 20 such cycles per minute. Recall from the table of time in different cosmoses, where it was noted that time is breath, and where our time of breath is taken as approximately 3 seconds. Hence it is upon these two directions, one in and another out, that we can reflect. How does this correspond with the psychic act of self-remembering? Remember the duality discussed previously in commentaries, and the diagram of 2 arrows pointing in different directions. These directions represent breathing in and breathing out. The triangle at the heart of the Enneagram has 3 points, numerically identified as 3, 6, and 9, with each point representing a place of shock. The shock at point 3 is the physical act of breathing. Consider then that the second shock at 6 is in some way corresponding, in some way a similar, in and out and in. The diagram of self-remembering goes one way and then the other, in and out and in, just as our breathing does. Except in this case it's inspiration or impressions coming in, an expiration or our expressions that radiate out from us. The first given shock of breathing bears relation to the second shock and correspondence to it. To comprehend this teaching and confirm it in our minds, reflect first upon the triangle located at the center of the Enneagram, then the nature of that first given shock of air, the inward and the outward movement of physical breathing that it illustrates. Then notice that the second shock at point 6, our first consciously given shock, has a relationship in character to the first mechanically given shock at point 3. The diagram illustrates this symbiosis. It is the two psychic directions or movements connected with self-remembering, as distinct from the two physical directions or movements of breathing. In self-remembering we must look in and look out at the same time. Be aware in each moment of what it is that we are receiving from impressions, and what we give out or radiate through our expressions. When a person is doing this you will have no doubt about it, as it gives a certain radiance of conscious awareness to their eyes. What is called being present, or if you prefer, wakey. To remember oneself it is necessary to look in and to look out, being aware of what we are allowing in and what we are resonating from that, how we are taking each moment. We must see the outer and see ourselves in relation to that outer. Obviously no one can see in and see out at the same time any more than a person can breathe in and breathe out at the same time. Someone's attention must go in and then out alternately. Then if they compare this with breathing, we can say that an act of self-remembering is an inward and an outward movement, not either an inward or an outward movement. An act of self-remembering is a double movement, as is the act of breathing. Then it's entirely up to us how we perceive and react to each moment, what we do with it. Self-remembering can be thought of as consisting in some to and fro motion, but psychological in nature, something that has to be carried out consciously, with a certain pressure of attention that is given through aim, or by the feeling of this work. What vibe do you want to give off constantly? For example, I look at that person, and then at my reaction in the light of personal aim, then outward again at the person, then inward at my reaction and so on. Check yourself constantly, pause if you must before reacting. It's okay to come across to others as being a little slow. Identifying then becomes impossible. This is an illustration of self-remembering, and as seen, a double or contradictory direction, the mirror of reflection in which you observe just what it is that you are doing, thinking, saying, and expressing to others. Unless we reach a point of understanding that this work and all esoteric psychology is about those inner states, and deals with our reactions to others who act upon us, it will all seem rather vague, fantastic and even unnecessary. Self-observation, the starting point of this work, is to make us realize our inner states. Evolution is an evolution of inner states. Self-development is a development of inner states. Only we can know our inner states, only we can separate from useless, negative or evil states. It is impossible to become more conscious, impossible to give the shock at point 6, unless we have begun to be aware of what kinds of things are in us, forces that we permit to grow and then express themselves through us. It is in us that they find life and are granted tenure. For this to occur it is necessary to turn and focus attention inwards first, then notice our reactions to the outer at each moment, through each interaction. We must of course also pay close attention to the outer. There's a great deal going on in each moment and we are not obligated to allow absolutely everything to enter our subconscious mind. We must find out what external and internal mean to us personally, and what this out and in movement means, for to be only in internals, or only in externals is wrong. There is you and there is the external world, transmitted to you through your senses. It's entirely up to you how you take each moment, which is the exercise of free will. There is the world and there are our reactions to it. If we cannot distinguish between ourselves and the external world, then we cannot apply the first conscious shock. Notice an external person, something or event, and notice your reaction to that, then distinguish between them and make a conscious choice, don't simply react.